Hello, government students. Today we are starting our last unit, Unit 5. Today we're doing Notes 5.1, Political Parties. Your essential question, what is a political party? Parties and what do they do? So if you are taking Cornell notes, you can write down some questions. What's a political party? What are the major functions of political parties? So a political party is a group of people who seek to control government by winning elections and holding office. We have two major political parties in the United States today. We have Republicans and we have Democrats. American parties are generally election oriented, so their focus is on elections and winning elections, holding office. Parties nominate candidates. So we have our two candidates right now that are running for president, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. They have both been nominated by their parties. Political parties inform and activate supporters. They guarantee that their candidate is worthy of the office. That's why they have a primary election to take all of the candidates and whittle them down to one that they think is worthy of being in that office. Parties govern according to their party, so they follow their party's guidelines, what their party believes in, with an allegiance to their party, and they act as a watchdog. So it's their job to check up on the other political party that's in power. So right now, the Democrats are checking up on the Republicans and holding them accountable for the things that they do. So in the United States, we've kind of always had a two-party system. So we started out with the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists when we wrote the Constitution. So we have this party system because it's our tradition. That's kind of what we've always had. Not that that's a good reason to do anything, but that's why we have the system that we do. It's hard to get people to change. We also have the electoral system, so we have the Electoral College. This kind of favors two major political parties and simplifies things on election night. And generally, people can fall under kind of an ideological consensus either on the liberal side or more conservative side. We do have more than just the two main political parties. All of these parties down here are also other political parties we have in the United States. You may have heard of the Green Party or the Libertarian Party before. Those are third parties, and we do have them. They do provide a broader representation for people. If we had a multi party system instead of just two parties, they could be more responsive to the will of the people and give us more choices when we vote. But it does cause some instability in the government if we don't have generally two political parties that we're following. There are many factors that influence why we join the political parties that we do. The biggest influence on your political party membership is your family. Generally, most people follow the same political party that their family is a part of. So, if your parents are one political party, you'll generally be the same political party. That's not always true. Some people rebel against their parents' political party, but that's generally how it works. Your economic status impacts your political party. Generally, if you tend to have more money, you'll tend to be more conservative, and if you have less money, you'll tend to be more liberal. What kind of job you have influences your political party membership. For instance, if you're working in a job that's paid for by tax dollars, if you're working in education, or if you're working in an airport, like something that's paid for, if you're working in construction on government buildings, roads, all of these things that are paid for by taxes, you could be in more favor of higher taxes to get your job paid for. Whereas if you're working in the private sector, if you own a business, you might be more conservative because a conservative party might want to lower your taxes. So your job can have an impact, definitely. Your age has an impact on your political party membership as well. Younger people tend to be more liberal, and older people tend to be more conservative. Highly religious people also tend to be more conservative. And then major events that happen throughout someone's life can cause them to be more conservative or more liberal. Our first political parties were, of course, the Federalists and the Anti Federalists. Remember when we were writing the Constitution, the Federalists supported the Constitution. They favored a strong executive branch. They represented the wealthy. They were led by Alexander Hamilton. The Anti Federalists, on the other hand, were not as supportive of the Constitution. They focused on Congress and the legislative branch. They represented the common man, and they were led by Thomas Jefferson. So, historically speaking, in the United States, we have had two parties, but we've sort of gone back and forth since about the 1800s. In the 1800s, sorry, we had the Democrats in charge, then the Republican charge, then the Democrats again. It kind of like swayed back and forth in these long periods of time. But now in the United States today, we have more of a divided government. So we'll generally go more back and forth. So since about the 60s, late 60s, we would go back and forth from a Republican like Nixon to a liberal like Carter, back and forth, Reagan, Clinton. We've sort of just gone back and forth since the 1970s about until today. There are minor parties in the United States. Some of these parties are single issue parties, like you may have heard of the Green Party. The Green Party is focused on the environment. So they want to focus on any environmental policy that's going to help save the world. They want to protect the environment. There are economic protest parties like the Tea Party a few years ago. They were TEA, as in taxed enough already party. So there's all kinds of third parties in the United States. While third parties generally don't win things like the presidency, they can still play important roles in our government. They can pull votes away from the major party candidates. They can be critics of the major two political parties and take stands, draw attention to controversial issues. They can be innovators. They can propose new solutions to problems, like the Green Party can pose new environmental regulations for California or for the United States to follow. But we generally have these two major political parties, and they're decentralized and they're fragmented. Our political parties, I'm sorry, small political parties, they don't have a strong leader. So these smaller political parties, it's hard for them to gain more power because they have such small groups. This is generally how a political party is organized. So we have the national committee on top, all the way down to the precincts down at the bottom. And this is what a precinct would look like. So, for instance, we have our congressional district. So, our congressional district in West Sacramento, we look at like the whole area surrounding West Sacramento. Then it's divided even smaller into wards and then into precincts. So, precincts could be like a couple of blocks or even maybe one large apartment building, depending on the city. So parties have three components. They're organized by who runs and controls the party. They have the electorate, the people who always vote for the party candidates, and they have the party in government. And those are those in the political party who hold office in government. All right, so we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about voters and voter behavior. So, suffrage or the franchise, these are two terms that mean the right to vote. The electorate is all the people entitled to vote in any given election. So, it's all the millions of people in the United States that could vote if they wanted to vote. But the framers of the Constitution specifically left power to specific people when they wrote the Constitution. Remember, you had to be white, you had to be male, you had to own property. All of those were your qualifications in order to vote. So that means any person of color can vote, and no women could vote when the Constitution was written. And no poor white males could vote either. You had to own property. So today, the size of the American electorate is huge. It's well over 200 million people. Nearly all citizens, at least the age of 18, can vote. And in California, you can pre register to vote once you're 16 years old, which is what we're going to be doing next week. The expansion of the electorate has happened in some stages, so we didn't just give everyone the right to vote. So during the 1800s, they started dropping the property requirements. So you no longer had to own property to be able to vote. You still had to be white, you still had to be male, but you didn't have to own property anymore. The 15th Amendment in 1870 ended race based voting requirements, so they no longer could deny you the right to vote based on your race, although that would take more time to actually get implemented. And in 1920, the 19th Amendment prohibited the denial of the right to vote based on sex. So it did give women the right to vote, but I should focus, it did give white women the right to vote in 1920. So Asian American women wouldn't really get that vote. Wouldn't get the right to vote until 1952, Native American women 1957, and African American women in 1965. So in the 60s, we also extended suffrage. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965, like I just said, gave the right to vote to minorities. The 23rd Amendment granted people who live in Washington, D.C., the right to vote for presidential electors. 24th Amendment in 1964 eliminated the poll tax, and the 26th Amendment in 1971 lowered that voting age from 21 down to 18, and that was because of the Vietnam War. Remember, we were sending young men off to war 3 years before they could actually vote for the representatives who voted to send them to war. So we had to lower that age for all those young men that were fighting and dying in that war. Setting voter qualifications. So the Constitution sets 5 limits on the power that states have to set voter qualifications. Okay, so no state can deprive any person the right to vote on the condition of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. States cannot require the payment of a poll tax, so they cannot charge you to vote in any condition. States can't deny the right to vote based on your sex, and states can't deny the right to vote to anyone who is a citizen over the age of 18 years old. So, voter qualifications. Generally, all states have the same requirements. You have to be a citizen of the United States, and you have to be a legal resident of that state. So you can't just fly over to Texas tomorrow and say, I want to vote in Texas. You have to be a resident of that state in order to register to vote in that state. And then you have to be at least 18 years old. States can also require that you register to vote. So, registering is filling out a form that looks like this. Once again, we're going to do this next week. You'll have to pick up one of these at any of the schools in West Sacramento so we can do this. Registration is the procedure to prevent voter fraud, prevent any sort of fraudulent voting from happening. Make sure that you are the person that you say you are. Literacy tests are no longer required. Literacy tests have been outlawed because they were used to prevent people of color from voting. They're very discriminatory, but they have been used in various times throughout US history. So they used to require poll taxes as well for people of color, specifically to prevent them from voting. Poll taxes are now forbidden by the 24th Amendment, so you cannot require someone to pay a poll tax if they want to vote. States also have restrictions on the right to vote for certain members of the population. So people that have been found to be mentally incompetent or people that have been convicted of serious crimes, some states do prevent them from voting. But serious crimes can be any sort of felony. So lots of states are fighting back against that now. Only 2 states, I believe, across the United States allow convicted felons while they're incarcerated to vote, but lots of states are trying to implement the right to give convicted felons the right to vote after they have served their full term. So here we can see our felon voting rights. 1 in 13 African Americans have lost the right to vote permanently in the United States due to a felony conviction. 1 in 56 non-Black voters. So as you can see here, African Americans are disproportionately affected by these laws. 6.1 million Americans in the United States cannot vote due to felony voting restrictions. So you can see here these 2 green states. These are the states where felons never lose their right to vote. So even while they're incarcerated, they can vote. The blue states are states where felons lose their right to vote while they're incarcerated, but as soon as they're released, they get their right to vote back after that. The purple ones here, states where felons lose their right to vote until the completion of their sentence. So that means after they get out of prison, after they're done with parole, after they're done with probation, then they can have the right to vote. In California, actually, one of our propositions that we're voting on this term in November, we are voting to see if we can give convicted felons the right to vote after they have served their prison sentence, but while they're on parole or probation. In California, we're going to decide whether we believe that they should have that right to vote or not. And then states in red here, these are states where people who are convicted of felonies, they can never get their voting rights back unless it's directly granted from the governor. So that's most people, they can never get their voting rights back. So political participation in the United States, we have about 50%, I would say, on a presidential election, we have about 50% of the population that actually goes out and votes when we're having a presidential election. Okay, so that's of the electorate. That's of people who are over the age of 18, who are citizens, who are able to vote, choose to vote. That's about half of them. When it's a non presidential election, so an off year election, when we are voting for our members of the House of Representatives, our members of the Senate, our state representatives, all of the laws on propositions, during that time, we have about 30% of people who actually get out and vote. So in 2016, our last presidential election, we had relatively high numbers for the United States. We had about 58% of people that could vote went and did vote. So we definitely have a lot of work to do. Hopefully, we have higher turnout in the 2020 election. So suffrage and civil rights. Remember, the 15th Amendment in 1870 declares that the right of vote cannot be denied based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. They would have to wait until the 1960s for this actually to get implemented fully. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 abolished the use of literacy requirements, and no more literacy tests to be used against any voters. There was a lot of violence in response to this piece of legislation. Dr. King in Selma, Alabama, helped march for the Civil Rights Acts of 1957, 1960, and 1964, but that was still not enough to ensure full voter equality. So we had to have the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This abolished the poll tax, outlawed literacy tests, tried to prevent racial discrimination in voting, just so African Americans and other people of color would actually have the full right to be able to vote. All right, and our last section here is about voter behavior. So, non voters. We have millions of Americans who don't vote every single time we have an election. In 2016, like I said, we only had 58% of eligible voters who could vote actually go out and vote. Only 49% voted in Congress in the congressional elections and off year elections in 2018. So, less than half the people that could actually went out and voted. Voter turnout significantly decreases in off year elections, so in elections that we're not voting for the president. We have a lot of people who have a lot of opinions, but then they don't go out and vote. So if you're not having your one opportunity to make a difference with your vote be heard, it's kind of hard for you to complain about the elected officials, about the schools, about the roads, about the laws. It's really hard to complain about any of those things if you don't do the one thing that you can to make a difference. So some people don't vote for various reasons. Some people are not citizens, so they can't vote. That is a pretty justifiable reason. Some people have sort of illnesses that prevent them from going to the polls. This year in 2020, every single person that's registered to vote will be getting a ballot in the mail. Normally that doesn't happen, but this year we're sending ballots to everyone because of COVID-19. So I actually just got my ballot in the mail today. Now you can mail that back in or you can drop it off on election day. Either way, they're trying to get that out as soon as possible so that everyone who wants to vote can vote. They're hoping this increases voter turnout. Most voters don't vote because they believe in some way it's inconvenient, or they don't think their vote will make a difference, or they distrust politics or don't like political candidates, so they don't want to vote at all. This kind of just shows you here how easy it is to vote. So I'm going to teach you all in class how to register to vote. It's a super easy form that we're all going to fill out together. You do actually get time off to vote. So if any of you have jobs and you have to work all day long, let's say they give you a 13-hour shift and you have to work from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., well, you can still go ahead and get time off to vote on election day because they have to give you at least 2 hours off to vote. Even if you were scheduled to work that whole time, they have to give you 2 hours off of work that you can go and cast your ballot. You can also vote by mail. So like I said, everyone in California is getting these ballots this year. Normally these are called absentee ballots. People do them every year. The majority of our military members do absentee ballots, so it's not anything that's new. We've been doing it for years and years and years, but now we're doing it for everyone just to make it easier and try to prevent the spread of COVID. Many states have same-day voter registration, so we actually have that in California too, but they do call it a provisional ballot, so they have to wait and verify that you are eligible to register to vote before they count your vote, so it does take a couple days. But yes, you can register now in California. That's something that's relatively new. You can also vote early in person. Lots of places in Sacramento are open on the weekends before Election Day that allow you to vote early in person. We have online voter registration in California. If you have a driver's license, you can register to vote online. If you don't have a driver's license, you can also register to vote online, but you do have to print out your application, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and mail it. So it is a little easier if you just have a driver's license, then you don't have to do any of that. And we have voting materials available in languages other than English. So we have about a dozen different languages that you can get your voting materials in if you speak a language other than English. Voter preferences can't really be predicted just by one sociological factors. They're a combination of all of these factors and more. So all of these things can impact your voting preferences. But these psychological factors can influence so voters' perceptions of their party, the candidates, and the issues significantly does affect their voting. So your party identification, the more loyalty that you have to a particular political party makes a significant impact on whether you'll vote. So if you are like a diehard Republican or a diehard Democrat, you are more likely to vote. Short-term factors such as the candidates and the issues can also influence people. Even the most loyal Democrat or Republican, we have very loyal Republicans right now who aren't supporting President Trump, even though they've been like lifelong Republicans. Because there's short-term factors. There's things about President Trump that maybe they necessarily dislike, so they don't want to support that candidate. But there are also some Democrats that are not supporting Joe Biden because although maybe they really liked Obama, they don't necessarily like Joe Biden. So issues such as that. And today we're going to go ahead and figure out where your party identification lies. So we're going to take a quiz after this and find out which political party you are. So go ahead and write a summary at the end of your notes, a couple sentences about what you learned today.